Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Laura and today I am wrapping up August and September. So this is everything that I have read over the last 2 months or the last 2 months of summer. I don't know, is September part of summer? They're kind of more autumn here actually, but I'm not going to talk about any of these titles in great depth. I'm just going to give, a quick overview of the things that I've been reading just because it is sort of a catch-up video for me. But certainly if you're interested in any of these titles, let me know, or if you've read any of these titles, I would love to chat with you about them. But anyway, let's just get started here. Oh, but before we get started, because this is a calendar, I might as well show you the picture. So today I am working on Sailor Moon and Tuxedo Mask, and then of course the inner senshi here in the background. So that is the picture we're going to do for August, and then for September is all of the girls in their Sailor Fuku, their junior high school uniforms, which is very cute. So yeah, that's what we're going to be working on, but of course these pictures are not going to show because you can't get a whole calendar to show and actually be able to see anything else. So anyway, let's get on to this. So for the month of August. I was actually participating in a sort of informal readathon. This was the Greybeard Challenge that Apollo Gray had issued, and so I had chosen a TBR based on, titles that were on my shelf, and then I chose the order in which I read them by a roll of the dice. So I did use sort of like a game of chance in order to determine what I should read and in what order. I didn't complete all of the challenge sort of rules and criteria. Like, I think you were supposed to read a certain number per week and a certain number per day. I just couldn't do it. I was pretty busy in the month of August, and I just wasn't in the mood to do all of that. But I did read in the order that I was supposed to. So let's look at that anyway. So the first thing that was on my TBR was Go-Go Monster by Taiyo Matsumoto, and this was so beautiful, super trippy. I don't know that I could explain it because of how just sort of strange it is. It has a slipcase, as you can see. It's just really strange and beautiful. I definitely need to reread this. I need to read it to figure it out. I really enjoyed it when I was reading it, and there were some like really great just sort of like comments on childhood in it and sort of the experience of being a child. I can't really say too much more than that because I don't remember a great deal about it, but I thought it was pretty great, and I definitely would be rereading it probably, I hope, fairly soon, so that I can kind of solidify some of my thoughts on it. I don't have a lot of thoughts at the moment, but yeah, it's sort of maybe a psychological take on the experience of childhood and the experience of being in school and trying to figure out how you fit in the world. As much as I didn't understand what was going on, I thought it was brilliant and really looking forward to reading it again to get a handle on it. Also, the publication is gorgeous, and even you can see like the pages are printed, which is really beautiful. Yeah, it's just a really, really nice publication from Viz. I probably should have taken some notes on that one though, because yeah, I don't feel like I can be very eloquent about how I talk about it. So the next thing that I ended up reading was Descending Stories Volume 1. This is Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju by Haruko Kumota. This is basically the story about a young man who is recently out of prison and wants to learn the art of Rakugo, which is a very stylized storytelling, or comedic storytelling kind of technique, I guess. And he ends up going to this gentleman here, and asks to become his pupil. And this man is known as sort of basically like a god of Rakugo. He's like one of the last living legends of this particular storytelling form, and so he ends up taking the younger man as his pupil. That's basically what the story is at this point. It is sort of just introducing some characters, introducing the idea of Rakugo. It is very different subject for manga. I've never read a manga about Rakugo. I have seen Rakugo performed on television before, but that's pretty much it. Apart from that, like, I don't know too much about it, and it's definitely a very interesting concept. I'm not 100% sold on the characters yet, and I think that there isn't enough depth there yet, particularly with the man who wants to become the pupil. I don't think that there's enough there for him in particular. For me to really kind of get behind him as a character, so I'm kind of waiting. Like, it at this point, like, it's a good story, but I'm looking forward to more, and there's a lot of potential for this to become more. So I am looking forward to reading more of this series, but at this point, I don't really know where it's gonna go. So on the 13th, I ended up finishing The Ghost and the Lady. This is book 2. From The Black Museum by Kazuhiro Fujita. So I think that this is a whole series called The Black Museum, and this is just like one story of The Ghost and the Lady. This was such a good series. This is highly recommended for me. This was published by Kodansha, and it is one of their hardcover publications. It's an okay quality, like, it's not the highest quality publication, but it's pretty decent for a hardcover. So basically this is the story of, a fantastical story of Florence Nightingale. She is sort of like the mother of modern nursing, and because of her kind of tenacity and innovation, nursing became kind of a respectable and noble profession and a really essential service. So she really made significant changes, and so she has had a massive impact on nursing. So she's like a real historical figure. This does take her, as well as many of the instances which are true instances in her history, true kind of episodes, but it spins them with fantastical elements, including a ghost who haunts her and kind of protects her because he or she has promised to let him kill her when she is at her darkest moments. But as the story progresses, even though the world is very dark and there are very hard things for her to live through, and it is like just the world is pressing down on her, she gets her strength almost from these horrible experiences, and makes great change and does great things. Throughout the series, he's always kind of waiting for her to despair. At the same time, she is able to see kind of evil incarnate, or these sort of manifested spirits in humans, and so, like, depending on the strength or the size of these manifested spirits, these particular characters, her opponents or her friends are like forces of strength, forces to be reckoned with. So there's that as well. For the most part, it's not about the fantasy elements. It really is about this strong character, and it's well written, it's well researched, it's really interesting. I feel like you learn a lot, though you didn't intend to, and you don't mind at all. I do still have issue with some of the art style. That is just, I just am not a fan of some of the handwork. There's just some elements of this that I take issue with. When just like the way that the pen is lifted in certain aspects, or the eyes that are drawn that look kind of mesmerized rather than like focused. There's some, different perspective that I take issue with. So, like, some of it is just I'm not a fan of, just as an art style or art quality. But, I thought it worked, and it's easy to forget in most instances. There was a few times where I was taken out of the story because the art was confusing to me, but for the most part, I was able to get past the art and really enjoy the title. So I highly recommend this. It's only 2 volumes. it's a really interesting, well-written, good series, so definitely give it a shot if you have a chance to. It's currently still in print. And then I also ended up picking up volume 2 of Kingo Yu's books by Seimu Yoshizaki. This is a great series. I'm so happy that I ended up reading it. I'd only read volume 1 up to this point, and I had reread it probably twice. I reread it for my readathon in July, but I'd never gotten any further, and I have finished buying all of the series recently, so, you know, there's only actually 4 volumes, I think, published in English, and I have now since then read the whole thing, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great. There's some really great moments in it. There's some powerful statements about comics and reading and manga in particular. This is really a story for manga lovers, for manga readers. So seriously, like genuinely, if you are a manga lover, definitely pick up Kingo Yu's books, because this is the manga for you. Like, this is, you know, basically our mantra, like, manga is for everyone. So I really enjoyed reading this. It was also just well written. It was fun to read. Every once in a while there was an episode that I didn't care for as much. This is an episodic story, although sometimes the story does continue from volume to volume, but like there's just a small background sort of story that's going on, and for the most part each story is kind of self-contained. Talks about tons of manga that I haven't read before but are kind of famous series, so I'm basically probably going to go through this series again and write down all of the titles that I need to read or pick up someday, and hopefully some of them will actually get translated. Yeah, I just genuinely liked this series, and I highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. And then on the 14th I read 2 volumes. These were not actually part of the Greybeard challenge. I ended up just picking them up because they were in my sister's room and they were the things she was going to read next, and so of course, being a sister, I like to bug her, and so I read them instead and took them away from her. So that is Kare First Love by Kaho Miyasaka, volumes 1 and 2. This is a pretty typical shoujo manga. This is about a girl who's very mousy and kind of you know, bullied in class and doesn't have a lot of friends, and then, you know, the cool boy comes along and somehow ends up seeing her without her glasses, and turns out she's more than she appears, and so he's interested in her and pursues her, and, you know, romance ensues. So yeah, it's really typical, but it's cute, it's fun, and you know, I haven't read it in 10 years, so I enjoyed picking it up, and it was a very fast read, so that was kind of nice too. There are some issues in it, and certainly more issues in it now, because of its age, and some of the content and some of the relationship dynamics of the characters, but, you know, for its time, it was just a fun, kind of average little romance title, and I had fun reading it. On the 15th, I just read the next 2 volumes, which are 3 and 4 of Kare First Love. I didn't read any further than this, and I haven't read any more since then, but I had fun just sort of dipping into this and reminding myself of the series and what it was about, because it's been a long time, although now I feel like I've already forgotten quite a lot of it, so maybe I'll finish it, or maybe I'll start over again. It was a very fast read. So back into the readathon, I picked up volume 3 of Kingo Yu's books. Again, really enjoying this title, highly recommend it. Then on the 19th I actually received a delivery in the mail, so I ended up picking up the title that I was kind of most intrigued by, which is Red Riding Hood and the Big Sad Wolf by Hachijo Arata. I have talked about this actually in my haul video. I really disliked it. I didn't think it was very good. Definitely not a title for me, and I'm still on the fence on whether or not I'm going to buy the second volume, not because I think that I'm going to read it, but because it's only 2 volumes long, and I feel like maybe it would be better if I had both volumes. Or maybe I should actually be one of those people who actually gets rid of their manga when they don't like them. I don't know. I'm still debating with myself, but definitely not for me. I didn't enjoy this at all. And then on the 20th, I actually read volume 4 of Kingo Yu's books, which is currently AWOL, and I'm not entirely sure where that volume is, because I have books all over my house at the moment. So anyway, I did finish up the series. I thought it was fantastic, and like I've said before, highly recommend it. On the 21st, I read 6 volumes, which included Bunny Drop 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Basically, the rest of the series, I ended up reading the first 4 volumes for my readathon in July, and then decided to finish off the series. I was really enjoying this series. I really had some high hopes for it. I did anticipate the ending. The ending is not unexpected at all. This is josei manga. It's a pretty common trope in josei manga, the way that this ends, but I'm not going to tell you how it ends because you can figure that out for yourself. I didn't like this as much as I liked the first bit, and I think that most of the problem lies in Volume 5, just because there is a significant transition issue between Volume 4 and 5. Volume 4, she's still a child in, like, early elementary school, and in Volume 5, she's in high school, like, right at the very end of school. So there's a massive gap between the two, and so there isn't a chance for you to, like, develop or understand, like, where her change in personality is and what her interests have been over the time period. So there's a massive gap problem between Volume 4 and 5, and so I had an issue with that. But overall, like, it was a pretty decent story. I probably will read it again. It was entertaining, pretty predictable, or very, very predictable, and everything in it was predictable. And the art style, I don't think, lended itself very well to the last half. You know, when she is an older character, I think that the art should have aged with her, or at least I think that would have made sense, or it would have really helped me understand where the story was going. So that was an issue. But it does complete in Volume 9, like 9 is the end of the series, and then Volume 10 is all omake, and basically are revisits to the main character as a young girl again. So if you want to read the series, you know, you can just end at Volume 9. You don't have to read Volume 10. So anyway, that's the thought on that. I did talk about it more extensively in a wrap-up or a shelf tour, so I will link that up here. On the 22nd, I read 1 volume, and that is Girl's Last Tour by Tsukumizu. This one is published by Yen Press. It is apparently a yuri manga, although I didn't necessarily get that vibe from this. It just happens to be that there are 2 girls in this post-apocalyptic world where there are next to no humans, and the world has basically ended because of war, and so there is, you know, heavy machinery and artillery everywhere. And so it's basically the 2 of them, kind of living in this world and trying to navigate finding food and just sort of finding supplies to live from day to day. It's very quiet, very contemplative, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I have picked up the 2nd volume of this, and I'm hoping to read it at some point. Yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was good. The art is different in it. You can see here there's definitely a different art style. And it was just really enjoyable. Really, really good title. There isn't a lot of plot to this though, and maybe that will kind of stop you up, but it is mostly about the characters themselves, and so I think that it does pretty well in what it needs to do. And then on the 29th, I actually read a full series, not part of this reading challenge. Obviously, I'm not reading much for the reading challenge, but I was talking to someone online, and they were asking whether or not they should buy the first volume of Midnight Secretary, and I was trying to explain to them that it wasn't something I would necessarily recommend, and I couldn't really remember too much about it and why I didn't recommend it, so I thought I should read it, and so I did. I read volumes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The covers are very pretty, you know, in the nice rainbow gradation that they've got here. This is basically the story of a woman who is a secretary, and she becomes a secretary to the the boss at the office, and it turns out that he's a vampire, and so she becomes this amazing secretary who, not only will book in women for him to suck the blood from, but also will offer her own blood to him, because that's what she should do as a secretary. It's so confusing to me. Basically, when I was reading this, I thought to myself, this feels like Twilight, only slightly more erotic, I guess. It definitely has that vibe. It's definitely an addicting story, like you feel like you want to just keep reading, but I don't think it's very good. I don't think it's very well written. And I don't like the characters. Like, this is not a fantasy of mine, but I think maybe it might get higher ratings because it is sort of, like that stereotypical fantasy of being able to change a man when you're in a relationship with him. So that's sort of what this is kind of leaning towards, but yeah, I don't know. I don't recommend it. I gave it 2 stars overall. I'm not saying it's not fun to read. It is fun to read, but I don't think that it's very good. So in August, I ended up reading 25 books, mostly manga. Now on to September. Now September should go pretty quick because I really didn't read a whole lot. Let's see. So on the 6th, I read 1 volume, which is She and Her Cat. I do have it somewhere, I just don't know where it is exactly at the moment, so hopefully we'll find that soon and put it back where it belongs. But anyway, I did talk about this a little bit in my August wrap-up. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good title. It's a single volume published by Vertical, I believe. I don't think the publication is really, up there. It's okay, but, it's not a title that you're going to be picking up all the time anyway, so it probably isn't going to get super damaged. I just feel like it's a quality that will get damaged fairly easily. At any rate, is basically the story told from the perspective of the cat, of a single young woman who's in her early 20s, has moved away from home, and is just sort of struggling with life and kind of the day-to-day grind of life, and kind of being dissatisfied with her situation with her life. It's sad and sweet, and really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good single volume of manga. I thought that was a pretty good one. So I ended up reading The Twin Knights by Osamu Tezuka. This is basically a continuation of Princess Knight, which is a title that I had read earlier in the year. Absolutely loved it. I thought it was so much fun to read. It is a story from the 1950s. It is an early shoujo manga written from a man's perspective, so there are going to be some issues with that, but I didn't take any issue with it because it was so enjoyable. It's just a fun fantasy adventure. There's quite a lot of twists and turns in it. It actually has a fairly complicated plot, although, a lot of things are resolved easily. It has really beautiful artistic style. Every once in a while, you're just surprised with his artistic abilities, or his artistic kind of creativity. And there's also quite a lot of humor in this, which I just really appreciated. So I had a lot of fun reading this. I thought it was so enjoyable, and I'm so glad to have it, and I definitely will be rereading it over and over. This is basically the story of twin royalty born to, actually, the Princess Knight from the previous series. And in this one, the prince is kidnapped and thought to be dead, but he is actually surviving and growing up in the forest. And in the meantime, the royalty is trying to hide the fact that the prince is gone, and so the princess is growing up as both the prince and the princess and has to kind of be disguised. So there is, the intrigue of the prince being out there, and as well as trying to unmask the princess. There's lots of adventure. It's just fun and cute and sweet, and I had a lot of fun. I had so much fun reading this. I really, really enjoyed it. Then I didn't read again until the 19th. I picked up Kiss Me at the Stroke of Midnight by Rin Mikimoto. This is a new shoujo manga that is being published by Kodansha. Essentially, this is a story about a young girl who's in high school, and you know she's one of these types that is worried about her kind of general appearance. So she does things like works really hard and is part of the student council and stuff like that. And their school is being used for a movie set, and so she ends up actually being asked, because she is a member of the student council, to be an extra in this movie. And so she ends up meeting the kind of cute movie star that of course she's going to have a love interest with. Essentially what happens, of course, like typical shoujo manga, he isn't as he appears. He's not as cool and awesome as he appears. You know, he is a regular boy, I guess, and a little bit narcissistic, and she ends up kind of witnessing it, and at the same time it's just like, well, that's just the way you are, and accepts it. And so he seems to be interested in her and keeps appearing in her life. So it's very cute. I actually really enjoyed it. You know, it is pretty typical, pretty predictable, but I think there were some elements in it that I hadn't seen from before. I think maybe, you know, his personality, because she was less shocked by it, I really appreciated that. I also, you know, despite the fact that he is portrayed as that kind of narcissistic character, I found him less irritating maybe than some other characters would be. Who knows how this story is going to go, though, but I enjoyed it so far. I thought it was quite cute, and I'm looking forward to picking up the next volume. On the 20th, I picked up 2 volumes, and that is Volume 2 and Volume 3 of Natsumi Ando's Let's Dance a Waltz. So this completes the series. It's just a 3-volume series. It's basically about the 2 main characters here on the cover. She is, you know, the usual plain, overweight, kind of doesn't like herself type of girl, and she ends up getting kind of dragged into a waltz class and says to herself, well, this is it. Like, this is the thing that I'm going to use to change myself because I don't like the way that I am. So she uses it to change herself. At the same time, the coolest boy in school, of course, is one of the teachers at the waltz school, or the dance school, and he has been resisting dance because of some problem in his past, some issue in his past. And despite the fact that when he dances with her, it's sort of like they're a perfect fit. So it's basically a story of her trying to convince him to dance with her. And I found it really cute. And I know that some people will be really frustrated with the ending, but I really, really appreciated the ending. I liked the way that it actually ends. Kind of an unresolved ending in a way, and I really, really, really liked that. So I actually thought it was pretty cute, pretty fun, still pretty predictable, but I enjoyed it quite a lot, and I'm glad I finally read it. So on the 23rd, I read 2 volumes, which were Volume 1 and Volume 2, finally, of Grey by Yoshihisa Tagami. I've had this in my collection for a long, long time. Not since it was published. I did buy it secondhand, but probably has been sitting in my collection for 10 years unread. Or maybe not quite that long, but it feels like a long time. And I finally have read it. I really enjoyed it, but at the same time, I found it quite dissatisfying. It's basically the story of Grey, who is this character on the front cover, and it is a story of his development as a character. And so all of the characters who kind of come into play really are characterless. It really is just about Grey, and sort of it's a post-apocalyptic world again, and Grey is trying to kind of gain membership or gain access to the city, and in order to do that as an outsider, you have to go to war, you have to be part of the war, and you have to earn a certain amount of points in order to move up the system. And so when you get to a certain number of points, a certain level, then you are finally gained access to the city as a citizen. And so this is basically him kind of going through the motions in gaining access to the center of the city, or to becoming an actual citizen, and what this caste system actually means and what it is he's actually doing. And it's more of a social commentary than it is really a story, and so it does feel kind of dissatisfying in that way. Not just because the story does feel slightly missing. I did really enjoy it though. I definitely will have to reread it again, like many of these series, just because it does have sort of more of an underlying message than it does an actual story, and so I think that I need to read it again to fully grasp it. But I actually really enjoyed it. I liked some of the characters that did kind of pop up, even though they don't have much depth to them. I actually found it kind of a fun read too, in a way. And then on the 26th, I ended up picking up one title, which is very tiny, and it's What's Michael's Mambo. And this is really one of the funniest comics or manga ever. I really, really like Makoto Kobayashi. I think he's just got like a great sense of humor. I think he's just so funny, so silly, and I really like this series of What's Michael. So anytime I see any What's Michael, I definitely will be picking them up. I think there's quite a few that were released in English, and they were just really expensive. Well, this one was only $8 in Canadian, but still $8 for something like this just felt like a lot of money. But basically these are just stories about Michael and a number of cats. So like these cats make an appearance all over the place. Sometimes, like it's sort of episodic, and it sort of feels a little bit like Garfield comics, except for like ownership changes hands. So sometimes he's the cat of a mafia boss, and sometimes he's the cat of this family, and sometimes he's the cat of that family, and sometimes he has a whole family of cats, and sometimes it's another cat altogether. But it's just really enjoyable, silly scenarios about cats and cat ownership and cat personalities. And so definitely if you're a cat person, you probably will want to pick this up, but even if you're not, it's just random, silly fun, and I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah, highly recommend What's Michael comics. They're great. And the last thing that I read this month was on the 27th. You can see, wow, I didn't read a whole lot that month. And so the last thing that I ended up reading was Topu GP by Kosuke Fujishiba. This is volume 1. This is the same author as Oh My Goddess, as well as Paradise Resident. So if you know either of these titles, you already are pretty familiar with what this title is about. This is essentially the story of this young boy here, and he is a motorcycle racer. Not necessarily an enthusiast, but he has a natural ability to race. It's essentially the story of him racing, but I know a lot of people aren't really enjoying this first volume. The thing about Kosuke Fujishima is that he has very kind of specific character types that he rewrites in all of his comics. So you kind of, if you know his work, you go into the story already knowing what the characters are. And he develops their backstories and stuff, I think, fairly slowly, and so you can kind of pick that stuff up. His stories are definitely slower and more slice of life than they are kind of high octane type series. So even though this is a story about racing, I don't think that it's ever going to feel like really intense. And so, like as a sports manga, it feels maybe a little bit slow, and certainly, even at the point of volume 1, you don't really have motivation for the characters. You don't know why they're racing or why they care or why you should care. But I really like Kosuke Fujishima, and as far as I know, I've read all of his series that he's released in English, and I really, really like his work. So I enjoyed this title because I think I enjoyed it mostly because I already know his work. I don't know, as someone who hasn't read his work coming into this, how you would really feel about it. But, he definitely has a different style of writing. It definitely has a different style of characters, and it's a style that appeals to me. So I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to the next volume. And that's all that I ended up reading in September. a whopping 9 volumes of manga. So I ended up being pretty slumpy in the month of September, as you can see. Just not my typical month, but just, you know, sometimes you're slumpy, sometimes you want to read a lot, and in the end it really is just read what you want. You know, there's nothing wrong with reading only 9, it's just unusual for me. Anyway, I have already been reading quite a bit in October, and I will be doing this filling in the calendar business until the end of December, so there are a couple more months of this to go, and then I will be doing something different in the new year to do my wrap-ups and stuff with, so yeah, so hopefully you've been enjoying these. If you've read any of the titles that I've read here and want to tell me about your experience reading them, I'd love to chat with you about it down below. Please let me know what you've been reading, or if you have any recommendations for things that you think that I would like, I would love to hear them. Anyway, thank you so much for watching my video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.